Under the shadow of the war in Ukraine and a worldwide energy and food crisis, world leaders are gathered in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. Over the next 6 days, discussion will focus on topics such as climate change and major geopolitical divisions since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The task is a challenging one, and the UN Secretary's opening remarks set a particularly grim tone.
Let's have no illusions. We are in rough seas. A winter of global discontent is on the horizon. A cost of living crisis is raging, trust is crumbling, inequalities are exploding, and our planet is burning. People are hurting, with the most vulnerable suffering the most. The United Nations Charter and the ideals it represents are in jeopardy. We have a duty to act, and yet we are gridlocked in colossal global dysfunction.
Despite political divisions, the UN remains a key gathering for world leaders, not only to deliver their views, but also to meet privately and discuss certain challenges. On the sidelines of the meeting, French President Emmanuel Macron met with his Iranian counterpart Ebrahim Raisi. The talks come as Europe is attempting to lead diplomatic efforts to revive the Iran nuclear deal.
Infections have been recorded in 6 of Syria's 14 governorates, mostly in Aleppo. A source from this hospital says more than 4,000 people have been treated here in the past 3 weeks. The UN says the war has caused extensive damage to water pipes and more than half the healthcare facilities aren't functioning.
In the past, we used to have at least the basic infrastructure there. Like, for example, getting, clean sources of water, and the sewage system is there almost, to deal with these sort of challenges. But now this, 12 years of war led into destruction of the infrastructure.
The WHO sent 2 plane loads of aid to the region and is training aid groups. But it's concerned about those already vulnerable to disease and hunger. For the hundreds of thousands of displaced Syrians living in camps, a fresh outbreak of cholera threatens further misery in the months ahead. Samir is 7 years old. He is weak and suffering from a skin disease. His family is from Pakistan's Sindh province, one of the regions worst affected by the flooding. They were trapped in their village Shardadkot for 1 week in August, before they found temporary shelter more than 300 kilometers away in a roadside camp. One of Samir's brothers did not survive. His father, too grief-stricken to speak on camera. Shelters like these have become a mainstay. Many people have similar ailments.
The floods have not only taken our homes, but also we are faced with acute diseases where everyone is suffering. The doctors just visit the camps, but we don't get proper treatment. It's very painful.
Some have found assistance in charity-run camps, but even they are facing severe shortages.
Almost all of us, including children, the elderly and women, got ill because we don't get clean drinking water and the government is not providing proper food. Kids have diarrhea and may die if they don't get proper medical care.
The World Health Organization is concerned about the spread of cholera, and local authorities say bacteria and parasites are thriving in the stagnant water, causing an outbreak of waterborne diseases.
The number of patients from the flood-affected areas are 550,000 gastro, 650,000 skin-related, 185,000 are malaria cases, and almost 12,000 are dengue-related cases, so it's a huge challenge.
These camps have become homes and clinics, but they lack basic food, clean water and medicine, stretching aid and healthcare workers to their limits.
Tonight, the flooding in Puerto Rico is catastrophic. Entire towns underwater, people on rooftops desperately waiting for help. In the southern town of Salinas, staggering aerial images. Roads and homes submerged. Hurricane Fiona drenching the island for days.
This is crazy.
Some parts are expecting up to 35 inches of rain through tomorrow. As the eye of the storm slogged west toward the Dominican Republic, its outer bands seemed to hover over Puerto Rico, washing out bridges, triggering mudslides and sinkholes. Most of the island is still without power. About 2/3 is now without running water, including Nixa Silva, who spent today trying to salvage what she could from her flooded home.
She says she was just a few blocks away, and it was driving her crazy seeing all this rain come down, and she wanted to come here but couldn't. She says the water line got all the way over here, and it kept raining for hours.
On his way home from Europe, President Biden called Puerto Rico's governor, Pedro Pierluisi, pledging more federal support. Late today, we caught up with the governor as he toured some of the devastation.
Is it fair to describe the power grid in Puerto Rico as a complete disaster?
No, that's too much. It is fragile. It is fragile.
Over the weekend, he had one of his press briefings interrupted by a sudden power outage.
Was the government here on the island prepared for this kind of storm?
Definitely. Much better prepared than when Maria happened.
Exactly 5 years ago tomorrow, Hurricane Maria slammed into Puerto Rico, killing an estimated 3,000 people and decimating the island's electric grid. After a private company took over power distribution last year, outages had intensified, and so had protests. The frustration here now rising.
No power, no water, nothing.
Fabian Morang and his family in Yabacoa are among the more than 1,000 people rescued across the island as the floodwaters swept through their homes.
Have you ever seen something like this before?
No, never.
Tonight, the rain is still not over in parts of Puerto Rico. The recovery is just beginning.
Gabe, it's a harrowing situation there. When can residents expect to get power and water back?
Well, Lester, the governor says he expects restoration to take days, not months like Hurricane Maria, but it will be a very long night here. You can see the cleanup effort already underway, down trees in many areas, and more than 2,000 people across the island are in emergency shelters.
As floodwaters from Hurricane Fiona recede, for families in southern Puerto Rico, it's time to clean up.
Category 1, like we don't know how this happened. Like how it got this bad, with just being category 1.
It's a lot of rain.
It's a lot of rain, exactly.
Yahaira Rodriguez says the hurricane caught her off guard.
There was the bathroom, is horrible right now.
Her home was still being repaired after being damaged during Hurricane Maria in 2017. Yahaira says she wasn't expecting the damage from Fiona to be so severe.
It was worse than Maria because in Maria it was more air than water, like the wind, it was really strong. And in this one, it was more rain and less wind.
A state of emergency remains in effect in Puerto Rico, allowing the U.S. government to send assistance to tens of thousands of people.
And this level of federal assistance is going to greatly assist in our ability to continue to provide the efforts that are needed to support those who need it most.
The southern region of the island was the worst hit by Fiona. Here, floodwaters are still on the doorsteps of many residents.
Up and down the neighborhood streets here in the community of Salinas in southern Puerto Rico, it's the same scene playing out. People are clearing out the mud, throwing away their damaged personal belongings. The storm may have passed, but the suffering is still not over.
Some 500,000 people in Puerto Rico are without running water, and thousands more without electricity.
A sign of an island hit again. This bridge, built after the last hurricane to hit Puerto Rico, washed away. 2 days before the 5th anniversary of Hurricane Maria, now Fiona. Maria was a Category 4, Fiona a 1. But the devastation appears to be just as widespread.
This is the Plata River from the bridge in Camarillo. It is approximately 10 feet from hitting the bridge. This is crazy.
The governor of Puerto Rico has called the damage catastrophic.
In many areas that had never seen flooding, there has been an unprecedented accumulation of water. In fact, in many areas it was greater than what we saw during Hurricane Maria.
Up to 76 centimeters of rain was forecasted to fall on some parts of Puerto Rico. Houses, businesses washed away. Landslides are continuing, and more than 1.3 million people are without electricity and will likely stay that way for days or weeks. Many also don't have access to clean water.
At my age, I've never seen anything like this before. I have no words to describe this.
It destroyed everything. Everything has been affected. It all has to be rebuilt. All this.
More than 1,000 people had to be rescued. And now Fiona has moved on to the Dominican Republic. The damage there, also widespread, as Fiona brought winds of more than 140 kilometers per hour.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I didn't sleep. I was sitting behind that door because the wind was strong enough that it would have taken me with everything. I woke up at 4 a.m. because the house was one large pool.
Fiona is expected to strengthen in the coming days as it next bears down on the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos.
Already considered one of the strongest storms Canada has ever experienced, Fiona made landfall in Nova Scotia early Saturday morning, bringing 150 kilometers per hour winds and heavy rainfall. The Canadian Hurricane Center says the storm's preliminary barometric pressure reading was the lowest on record for Canada. The lower the pressure, the more powerful the storm.
We're thinking first and foremost of the people who've had a terrifying past 12 hours. People who've seen their homes washed away, seen the winds rip schools, roofs off. But as Canadians, as we always do in times of difficulty, we will be there for each other.
About 100 people were evacuated in Halifax, the provincial capital. Nearly 3/4 of Nova Scotia was left without power as crews raced to restore electricity amidst widespread reports of downed trees and power lines. The mayor of Halifax told Al Jazeera he had no doubt climate change made the storm worse.
With climate change in particular and the volatility of weather these days, we've been getting more of these hurricanes.
Fiona's northward path then took it through the Newfoundland town of Puerto Basques. A woman was rescued from the sea after her house collapsed, according to police. Widespread damage led the mayor to declare a state of emergency, posting this video to Facebook.
Actually, hi, I'm going live here again and going to be pretty direct now with people. We're in the process here of calling a state of emergency. Our town is, in all intents and purposes, we are already in a state of emergency.
No serious injuries or fatalities were reported in the hours after Fiona came ashore, though authorities caution the danger is not yet over. Fiona has weakened, but may pick up energy again as it continues to move north.
On the outskirts of Puerto Rico's capital, San Juan, Victor Serrano, an electrician, is helping his neighbor repair power generator cables in the wake of Hurricane Fiona.
I'd help any one of my neighbors. We're all here to help each other.
With the generator cables repaired, Luis Alvarez hopes to power a few appliances in his home. After 5 days without electricity, success. The lights are back on, at least until the petrol powering Luis's generator runs out.
I look at my situation and I think about people who don't have the economic means. How do they get by without electricity and running water?
Those on the island fortunate enough to have generators are managing through the persisting blackout. But for low-income residents like Fernando and Isabel, no electricity has meant spoiled food and sleepless nights.
Right now, what's coming is a heat wave, temperatures of 40 degrees, and we're already feeling it.
Many here say power outages have been a problem for years, blaming an antiquated power grid and poor management by Luma, the island's power management company. Jorge Bracero, an energy sector whistleblower, says Fiona dealt a death blow to an already crumbling electricity infrastructure.
I think we need a massive overhaul. We need a massive upgrades in infrastructure in the streets, but we also need a massive overhaul in our power generation.
The U.S. government has promised to increase aid and assistance to Puerto Rico in the wake of Fiona. Though many seem skeptical, the help will be enough. In the island's commercial centers, it's clear that lack of electricity is having a damaging impact on the local economy.
As night falls over San Juan, the sounds of power generators echo through the streets. And the question on everyone's mind is how much longer will it be before power is fully restored on the island?
Highways have become waterways. The only hospital within a 35-kilometer radius is partially submerged. Even the dead here can't rest in peace. Beneath these murky waters, residents say lies the community graveyard. Muhammad Wanway's family was hit hard.
The water tore through my compound and brought down the entire house. 3 of my children died, 2 are in hospital.
Residents say this year's floods are the worst in more than half a century. The country's emergency agency says more than 500,000 people have been affected.
Officials here say huge swathes of Jigawa State are underwater, including 20,000 hectares of rice paddies and cornfields. In addition to immediate concerns about destroyed livelihoods and incomes, there are fears of food shortages before the next planting season.
Government buildings are now housing thousands of displaced people. Conditions here are desperate. With many people still unreachable, officials struggle to deliver aid.
In fact, the devastation is beyond the resources of the state. As president, what we can only offer is we offer feedings, we offer beddings, and some part of mats for sleeping and mattresses, and medical care, and maybe toilet facilities in the camps and water facilities.
Nigeria's Emergency Management Agency says nearly all of the country's 36 states have been affected by this year's floods. With dams still bursting their banks and rains still in focus, the worst may not be over for Nigerians living in riverine.
The higher this drone flies, the more desert it can see. Iraq's famous and historic marshes once covered these lands, but not anymore. This is what is left of the palms, citrus trees, and many other types of fruits that were grown on what was a 400-acre farm.
It was gradually dying due to the shortage of water. First the citrus trees and then the palm trees have died. So many people have left the area. I'm thinking of leaving, but the question is, where should I go? You can sell your land, but what comes after that? No one knows the future. Only God does.
What used to be the Middle East's largest food-producing region can't feed itself anymore. Over thousands of years, the country's 2 main rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, transformed the desert around them into green meadows. But now, 70% of the water that once flowed through them is gone.
The level of water and the water supply in the country is too low, and we started to see this impact on the very local communities, specifically farmers, specifically people who are living in rural areas, those who are counting on their livestock to survive, those who are farming on a daily basis, those who use water in every aspect of their daily life, every day.
This extends from the very north to the Mesopotamian marshes in the south.
Drought has reduced these famous marshes in some areas to puddles. And that's damaging the lives of the people, the wildlife, and ecosystems that depend on them.
Low water levels are threatening one of the area's famous animals, water buffaloes. These mammals need water to reduce their body temperature and produce better milk. Now, herders are forced to buy drinking water to keep them alive. The environmental crises are pushing them to sell their cattle at low prices and leave to try and find better opportunities.
If water levels continue to decrease, water salinity goes high, the taste becomes bitter, and cattle here cannot drink this water. It kills them. Fodder is expensive due to the lack of water and food. The animals fall and die. Lots of people have lost many animals.
Everyone around the marshes knows Omar al-Sheikhli. He has been researching this area for almost 2 decades, but has never seen it this dry.
Iraq always negotiation between Turkey and Iran to agree about what is the shared water budget that Iraq needs, at least to rehabilitate some deteriorated places or like area with devastation situation like the Iraqi marshes. The continuous decrease of water budget to the Iraqi marshes. It will change the Iraqi marshes to a barren area, and the area of a wetland of the Garden of Eden will change to a desert.
In May, Al Jazeera shot this footage of the marshes. There was much more water. Today, it's decreasing, endangering these creatures and forcing their owners to leave their historic homeland.
Mexicans had only just trooped back into their office buildings after an earthquake drill when suddenly...
This is insane, 3 times.
The real thing began. Cue buildings shaking, roads bouncing and nervous faces. They'd be forgiven for thinking that this day, the 19th of September, is cursed. You can probably see the people behind me that are still gathered outside of their buildings. I'm right in the Paseo de la Reforma, which is the main avenue in Mexico City, and they're gathered here because we just had an earthquake that's more than 7 on the Richter scale. Some more people behind us over there. What's actually really bizarre about this earthquake is that it's happened exactly on the anniversary, the 19th of September, as 2 other major earthquakes in Mexico, one in 2017 and one in 1985. Some people on Twitter starting to talk about the Aztec curse. Even the time, just past 1 p.m, was almost identical to the 2017 quake, which killed more than 300 people. The good news, this time around damage was minimal, much less than those terrible earthquakes of the past, leaving behind only a sense of bewildered awe that it could happen again.
When the earthquake alarm sounded a second time, we thought it was an error. You wouldn't think there would be a quake again on the same day at the same time, but what are the chances?
People here will surely be marking their calendars for next year. 19th September, not a day to be on the top floor.
The only gas Wilma Marais still uses is for the tea lights, used for her improvised stove. The terracotta pots retain heat, which helps keep her a little warmer as the colder weather approaches. The shop owner decided to have her gas cut off after her bill doubled to $345 a month, with a warning from her provider that it could reach $700.
My shop has hardly any income. I lost customers during the COVID-19 pandemic, and now inflation is so high people don't have money to buy children's clothes. So my income has really dropped below minimum. I know I can't pay these high energy bills.
While it's getting colder in her house behind these doors, millions of chrysanthemums are thriving in warm temperatures. But greenhouse farmers depend on gas to continue operating during winter. And many have decided to stop growing flowers and vegetables in the next few months, something that could seriously affect Dutch exports.
Normally, if we have every year 10% extra cost, it's not a problem, but it's now 10 times more than 2 years ago. It's crazy. In this way, if nobody can survive, no company, no people with a household, nobody.
With new techniques that use less fossil fuels, Wouter Duivenstein hopes to be able to continue his business, although he's worried that the prices of flowers will climb so high that demand will dry up.
The Dutch pay twice as much for gas as other Europeans due to hefty energy tax and their dependence on gas to generate electricity. And while other EU members have kept their energy prices, the Dutch government is being accused of doing too little, too late.
Protesters carrying flags upside down booed the royal family after King Willem-Alexander delivered his annual budget address, promising a price cap on energy and $18 billion to compensate poor families. A recent survey suggests that 7 in 10 Dutch citizens have lost trust in the government.
If you get problems of whether you can pay your food and energy, because that's what we're talking about. Even if they work full-time, if they can still pay the basic necessities, then yeah, that's the best way of eroding trust in your own government.
Opposition parties say that the government's aid package has not been thought through and fear it won't be enough to keep the country warm this winter.
No to war, they chant. Russia without Putin. It isn't clear exactly who their protest is aimed at. They're Russians in self-imposed exile against the war in Ukraine, their presence tolerated by staunch Kremlin ally Serbia, one of only a few countries to which Russians can travel now visa-free.
My voice might be a drop in the ocean and maybe it won't be heard, but I have to speak out anyway.
Alexei Novikov is among an estimated 50,000 Russians who've landed in Belgrade since war broke out in February, many on one-way tickets. The pace of arrivals is thought to have escalated in recent days, with young men in particular escaping President Vladimir Putin's partial mobilization of reservists.
I don't want to take part in a war against the Ukrainian people for some unclear, vague objectives. And probably very soon they will try to mobilize in Russia en masse, and they will take anyone they can catch and send them to the front line to be used as cannon fodder.
So-called brother nations, their fellow Orthodox Slavs in Serbia, offer the Russians familiarity and a warm reception. But given the political ties between Belgrade and the Kremlin, it's an unlikely harbour for dissent.
I feel that people don't understand that Russians are against the war. They really feel that Putin and Russia is equal, and I want to express my feelings that it's not, and that we are really against the war.
No one is suggesting that small expatriate populations like this one, however vocal, are about to turn public opinion in Russia against President Putin or the war.
For one thing, it's highly unlikely they'll even be seen or heard by most Russians on state-run media. But many people here do feel that the recently announced mobilization or call-up of reservists is likely to bring a new awareness of the war to Russian homes and Russian society.
And that, in turn, is a step closer towards a possible tipping point.
It is one thing to sit on a couch and contemplate how we are conquering Ukraine, and quite another to be in a trench with a machine gun. So I think that the dissatisfaction of the people is already quite strong, because those citizens who support Putin and the war have started to express their dissatisfaction with what is happening in Ukraine. And the mobilization now will push people to protest against it.
From a place of relative safety now, having left their old lives behind, these Russian dissenters are determined to play their part.